In this tutorial, we will walk through how to run and interpret an independent sample t-test. The example here is based on a study aims to find out the effect of experiential and traditional learning strategy on communication skill of secondary school students. To test this study, the students were split into two groups. One is the experiential learning group and second is the traditional learning group. Our variables here are dependent variable, communication skill, and the independent variables, experiential learning and traditional learning strategy. We have collected the data and the data sheet for the same is open here. These data were entered in SPSS with all the characters defined in the variable view. We can see that we have two groups here, and in the value column we have two groups. One is experiential learning and other is the traditional learning group. And we have the labels here, learning groups and communication skills score. So going to the data view, we have the grouping variable in the first column and the independent variable score in the second column. For an independent t-test, the data file should have at least two columns, one for the independent variable and other for the dependent variable. So the independent variable uses codes to assign group membership to each level. Like I said, we have two groups here, the two learning groups. One is the experiential and the other is the traditional learning group. Each column represents a different variable and each row contains the data from one participant. As mentioned in the beginning of this tutorial, the independent t-test compares the scores of two groups on a certain variable. In this case, we want to compare the communication scores of two groups, that is the experiential learning group and the traditional learning group. To start the analysis, first we need to click on the Analyze menu and then Compare Means option. Then we have to select Independent Sample t-test. This opens up Independent Sample t-test dialog box. Here we need to tell the SPSS what variables we want to analyze. First you need to tell SPSS what your grouping variable is. So to do this, select the grouping variable. Our grouping variable is learning groups. Select the grouping variable and click the second arrow button. Then group has now two question marks next to it. This means you have to tell SPSS which conditions you want to compare. As the conditions of the independent variable are entered into SPSS with numeric codes, you need to tell SPSS which codes represent the conditions you want to compare. To do this, by clicking on the Define button here, and the first group we have given the number 1, for the second group we have given the number 2. Then select the Continue option. Now we need to tell SPSS what your dependent variables is by adding into the analysis table. So select the dependent variable here and click on the arrow button. Now both the variables have been added. So click on the OK button to run the analysis.